Riot police in classrooms, students occupying university campuses, thousands protesting on the streets. This is France right now, as students are uniting to fight reforms to university selection. Go back 50 years and you will find similar scenes. Millions of French students and workers took to the streets calling for a revolution. The spring of 1968 paralysed the French government and would change the culture of France and much of the rest of the world forever. Half a century has passed, so what has inspired the students of France to rise up again? Welcome to the latest episode of our So What Explainer series, where we talk about the biggest stories around. Some maybe you didn't even know were happening. Don't forget to comment if you have a story that you want covered, and like and subscribe because, well, YouTube. This episode, we're looking at France, where the country is seeing the biggest student protests in at least a decade, and why these protests are a threat to French government. But to fully understand what's happening today, we have to talk about what happened 50 years ago. 1968 saw France gripped by waves of protests, dramatically altering the country's political and cultural makeup. Now, you may or may not have heard of Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, and Jacques Derrida. They're philosophers and writers who helped shape the world as we know it today. In 1968, they stood alongside students in Paris, protesting against capitalism and the order of the country. Fast forward to 2018, French students are building barricades on the streets once again. So what are they protesting about? In France, every high school graduate is guaranteed a place at university. This system was actually created in 1968. So the idea was that everyone in France should be given an equal opportunity in further education. But now, President Macron is scrapping that guarantee. Why? To make French universities more competitive. France would become more like the UK and the US, where high school students apply to specific universities, who can then accept them or reject them. Critics of Macron's proposed changes think this will lead to universities becoming more exclusive and elitist.
L'objectif avec cette loi pour le gouvernement, en réalité, c'est de pousser toute une série de jeunes de milieux populaires en dehors de l'université, dans l'objectif de faire des économies à la fac et d'adapter les formations aux besoins du grand patronat. Au lieu de construire une université ouverte à tous et toutes, qui développe un savoir critique pour pouvoir pousser vers l'émancipation, le développement de la personnalité et de l'esprit critique de tous les jeunes, le gouvernement fait le choix de mettre en place une université qui sert uniquement à former la future main-d'œuvre.
So now, students across France are occupying their campuses, holding general assemblies and marching in large numbers. Some universities have had to cancel classes and exams, others have had to close entirely. Students have clashed with riot police, who have also evicted them from some campuses. So some students have set up makeshift general assemblies instead. They're using these spaces to debate, protest, and even organise boycotting their final exams. The echoes of 1968 are pretty clear. So what happened in the spring of '68? It was a year of cultural change across the globe, from the assassination of Martin Luther King and the passing of the Civil Rights Act to increased pressure for peace in Vietnam. Young people around the world were demanding change, and France was no different. Economically, the country was doing well, but it was a conservative country. How conservative? Women not being allowed to open a bank account without their husband's permission kind of conservative. During the 60s, the number of students in France had nearly trebled from 175,000 to 500,000. It actually all started as a protest where male and female students just wanted access to each other's rooms, which then exploded into a cultural and political revolt against a conservative-minded society. Ultimately, the calls for a revolution in 1968 went pretty much unheard, and the government actually survived it. But liberalism had challenged conservatism and started to reshape society. Are we going to have another revolution? Okay, that's a lot of history, and you're probably asking, what's that got to do with today? Well, the students now are using the same tactics: occupation, barricades, and street protests. They're clashing violently with police. They're taking on the government and demanding changes to policy. Like 1968, these protests started in the spring and have picked up momentum. There is a long, hot summer ahead.
Alors il y a certains étudiants très politisés, très mobilisés ou qui sont étudiants en histoire qui ont eu cette référence en tête dès le mois de février pour se dire qu'ils allaient refaire un printemps 2018 à la hauteur de 1968.
But 50 years have passed and the students of 2018 live in a different world from their grandparents. May 1968 was a generation of young people trying to break free from a restrictive, conservative past. It was about change. Today's student movement is about preserving that legacy. Their grandparents and the protests of '68 helped secure their right to a university education, and they want future generations to have the same chances that they've been given. But some students reckon today's protests have a different meaning to those that took place 50 years ago.
Mai 68, c'était il y a 50 ans, donc évidemment pour nous aujourd'hui, on a moins envie de commémorer mai 68 que de recommencer. Mais encore une fois, c'est un mouvement complètement différent, avec d'autres objectifs.
Could it threaten the government? Emmanuel Macron has been in charge of the country since May 2017. At 40, he's the youngest president in France's history and has made a big impact on the world stage. From schmoozing with President Trump, remember that handshake?
I like him a lot.
To establishing himself as one of Europe's most important players. But back home, it hasn't been so easy. His approval rating has dropped from 67% to just 40% in a year, and it's not just students who are angry about his policies. Macron has made sweeping reforms to the labour market, public services and workers' rights in the name of modernisation. And in an attempt to reduce France's relatively high unemployment rate, he's proposing to tax pensioners to pay for his labour reforms. So he's facing strikes and a backlash from people young and old across the country. And this is where 1968 becomes so important. Back then, student protesters united with workers in strikes that paralysed the country, forcing the French government to give in to demands for higher wages and pass laws to liberalise the country. Macron will remember the country's history and will be hoping students and workers don't unite again. So what will happen next? Macron says he's passing reforms whatever the opposition. And he definitely isn't the first French leader to face unrest. France really likes to protest. The students say they'll carry on until the university reforms are stopped. At the moment, the protests aren't at the scale of 1968, but some think that could easily change.
Ce qui est comparable en revanche à mai 68, c'est le niveau de répression en fait. C'est-à-dire que le fait de chasser les étudiants des universités quand ils l'occupent, en fait on est juste au stade où on voit si ce niveau de répression va entraîner une réponse de la même ampleur au niveau des étudiants.
Vive